The poet of the afterlife has become kind of a ghost himself. Being born a Guelph meant that you inherited friends, enemies, and quite a lot of political drama from day one. So maybe exile gave Dante what Florence never could. Florence has given us numerous prominent names, but none quite like Dante Alighieri, let's be honest. Poet, philosopher, rebel, a man whose love inspired some of the greatest verses known to mankind, whose exile gave birth to the Divine Comedy, and whose death left behind a mystery that still lingers. Today we are tracing his story through Florence, from youthful beginnings to forbidden love to political downfall, and finally to the mystery of his remains. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and if you want to support us, make sure to hit the thanks button down below or check out my travel guides, including the Florence travel guide in the description box, because it is thanks to your support that we can still make these videos and keep going. Dante was born here in Florence, in this house, in 1265. Into a Guelph family, the supporters of the Pope against the Holy Roman Emperor. And politics in Florence back then was really messy. And being born in Guelph meant that you inherited friends, enemies, and quite a lot of political drama from day one. Young Dante grew up surrounded by power struggles and factions, but also by a city bursting with poetry, philosophy, and art. He learned the classics, he trained as a knight, and even fought in a battle. Not your typical introverted poet, right? He fought in the Battle of Campaldino with the Florentine Guelphs against the Arezzo Ghibellines, and he was responsible for the first attack. To further his political career, he obtained admission to the Guild of Physicians and Apothecaries around 1295.
He likely joined the guild due to association between philosophy and medicine, but also may have joined as apothecaries were also booksellers. His guild membership allowed him to hold public office in Florence, and as a politician he held various offices over some years in a city rife with political unrest. And then came Beatrice. According to tradition, Dante first saw her here in this church when they were children, and it was love at first sight. Not in the ordinary sense, they barely spoke, but for Dante she became everything. Beatrice was his muse, his vision of purity, his guide toward the divine. When she died at just 24, Dante's grief was devastating. Yet out of that grief came one of his earliest masterpieces, the Vita Nuova, where love and poetry fused into something greater. Beatrice became less a woman and more a symbol of wisdom, transcendence, and the soul's path to God.
But Dante's story is not only about love, it is also about rebellion and punishment. Florence in his time was an actual chessboard of political factions and tensions. The Guelphs split into the white Guelphs, who opposed the papal interference, and the black guelphs who supported it. Dante, outspoken and sharp-tongued, sided with the whites. Bad move. When the black guelphs seized the power, Dante was accused of corruption, fined, and condemned to exile. Initially, his exile had to last for 2 years, under the condition that Dante paid a hefty fine. But Dante refused, partly because he still stood by his convictions, but partly because the black guelphs seized all of his possessions in Florence. So Dante refused to pay the fine, and his 2 years long exile turned into perpetual exile. He could never return to Florence again, otherwise he would have been burned at the stake. He never saw the city again. Dante spent some time living in Verona, being the guest of the city rurals themselves, the Della Scala family, and then he also lived in Sarzana and Lucca, here in Tuscany, where he allegedly was pretty comfortable, living with a woman called Gentuca, who he mentioned in the purgatory section of the Divine Comedy later, probably as a sign of gratitude. Some rumors have been circulating in the scholarly circles for centuries, claiming that Dante spent a part of his exile in Paris, and some even saying that he went as far as to Oxford. Obviously, these claims are not supported, and most likely are the result of later scholars being truly impressed by Dante's erudition. But one thing is known for sure: by not engaging in the politics of Florence anymore, he had all the time in the world to dedicate himself to other pursuits, such as philosophy and literature. So maybe exile gave Dante what Florence never could, the space to write the Divine Comedy, the work that would change the whole literature around the world forever. But the Divine Comedy wasn't just a story, it was a work full of symbolism and hidden meaning, and even today we might actually be missing quite a lot when interpreting it. Some scholars actually think that it was an initiation. Dante was rumored to be part of secret societies, the secret circles of Florence back in the time. Like, for example, Fedeli d'Amore, Faithful of Love, a group of poets known to be using hidden language to talk about the divine mysteries. Love for them was more than just a feeling, it was the key to higher knowledge. And women like Beatrice represented Sophia, which meant wisdom in their poetry.
Dante even warns us. In the Inferno, he writes, "O you possessed of studied intellects, observe the teaching hidden here beneath the veil of verses so obscure." The comedy maps a spiritual journey. First, the descent into hell, the black night of the soul. Then, the climb of purgatory, the purification of the self. And finally, the ascent to the stars, to God, to illumination. It's poetry, yes, but also philosophy, mysticism, and alchemy.
Dante himself was actually the first to hint at the hidden meaning of his work through his theory of mystical sense, of which almost everything is lost today. We don't really know much about him developing this philosophical theory. But one thing is certain, Dante did use esoteric language meant to be understood only by those who already possess certain clues that might very well be lost today. However, some people actually claim that the Divine Comedy was linked to the Knights Templar. Dante died in Ravenna in 1321, still in exile, and his masterpiece wasn't even complete. It was actually his son who made sure that the final cantica was published. But it is what happened after his death, what I think is worse, the comedy itself. Maybe a dark comedy, but still. Florence, ashamed of Dante's exile, demanded that his remains be returned to the city. So here in Santa Croce, they actually built a tomb for him, a monumental tomb that remained empty because Ravenna said no. The Franciscan friars in Ravenna, in the monastery where Dante was buried, have decided to hide his remains in a wooden box inside the wall. And for centuries, nobody knew where exactly the Dante's bones were, because the sarcophagus in Santa Croce was empty. Dante's tomb in Ravenna was empty as well. And you know, this kind of an irony where the poet of the afterlife has become kind of a ghost himself. His bones resurfaced only in the 19th century by pure chance when a mason stumbled upon them during the restoration works, but even then they were not safe. During the Second World War, the friars had to hide them again, that time to protect them from bombings and looting. And today Dante's remains are still in Ravenna and not in Florence. And I think it's kind of fitting, you know, because Dante, with his eternal exile, his life spent in exile, has never truly returned home, even though here in Santa Croce everything was prepared to welcome his remains home, but it never happened. Actually, fun fact for you guys, it was only in 2008 when the city of Florence formally lifted the exile order, once ordered for Dante centuries ago. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's kind of sad, but it's true. Dante was born here. Dante is known as the Florentine poet, but his remains are not here and will likely never be here. Dante was a man of contradictions. You know, soldier and poet, lover and mystic, a Florence native who spent his life in exile. And his life, his entire life, burned with passion. And I think this is also the reason why his verses today still make us look for hidden meaning beneath the surface. He still does not feel like a dusty medieval figure even 7 centuries after. He feels alive. This genius poet who turned pain into poetry and who turned exile into eternity. And I think that's what lets us take his story and bring it to life here in Florence, where everything began for him. And next time, next week, I will bring you another story. I will bring another story to life. So just reminding you to subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. And I hope that you enjoyed the story. I hope that you will have a lovely day ahead. Thank you so much for watching.